like it was a different atmosphere just being out at the game.
Mm-hmm.
And like just being chill about, being out in public, and nobody was wearing masks, and it was just, nice to, like, New Brunswick, their mandates are obviously different than ours are. They're probably going to lift their mask requirements later this month, like on the 21st. But just, being able to actually come back, land Edmonton, and like literally halfway through the airport, like if I wanted to, I could have taken off my mask. I suppose I shouldn't say if I wanted to, it'd more like if I remembered to, like I could have taken it off. Because of course those mandates had all lifted by the time I landed.
Shall we get into this?
Oh, you mean we aren't already into this?
Oh.
Welcome back to another episode of Scouting Stuff. You've got two of us this evening. Scouter Colin is at that end of the internet.
Hello.
And I'm Scouter Ken. I am at this end of the internet. Discord is still a thing for the time being.
Oh, how was your trip?
Trip in and of itself was good. I got the work done fast ahead of time. And I don't know how much I talked about this previously, right? I think we talked about this on the last episode, right? Like the Atlantic bubble and the isolation requirements and all of that stuff. So they let me out early, which was nice. It was supposed to be, 14 days, but then after I tested negative on day 5, they let me out. So day 10, I think that I finally got out of there. But that was enough to get an early head start on the work with the client. And so, basically we were able to condense a planned 3 weeks of work into just 2, which is good.
That's good.
So I was able to be home. Yeah. But, and I mean, John's an all right place to visit. Actually, the place that I really enjoyed visiting, went there a couple of times. Like one Sunday I was there and I'm just like, well, I got nothing else to do. So I drove around and I discovered the little fishing community of St. Martin's.
Oh, yeah.
And it's just this sleepy little fishing village on the coast of the Bay of Fundy, maybe a 40-minute drive from St. John. But just a lovely place to be. I quite enjoyed just like walking along the beaches there. And like there's a lot of like red sandstone. And a lot of it's been shaped. So there's like big sandstone caves and things like that. And just all sorts of neat little sandstone formations along the beaches. So just really enjoyed like wandering through and checking the place out. And I mean, of course, trivially easy to find good fish and chips pretty much. That was like my default meal. It's like, if I'm looking down the menu and I can't decide what else I want to have, I'll just try your fish cakes or your fish and chips or whatever.
Well, if you're that close to the ocean, you got to eat fish. I'm sorry.
Yeah, or lobster rolls or scallops or,
It's got to be some seafood.
Yeah, it's like the water's right there. On certain days, I can smell it like from here. Like I should probably eat fish.
We don't. We don't get like super fresh seafood like you would in a fishing village, right? Like that's
There's one
fresh catch right there. Doesn't get much.
Pretty much, yeah. There's one place in Edmonton. So, like my wife spent a lot of her summers out on the Pacific coast, and of course, her family were all about like the fresh fish. It was not unusual for them to like buy like salmon and whatnot right off the docks. And so, consequently, my wife has a very, very high standard when it comes to fish and chips. There's exactly, and I don't know if we can still eat there, obviously, with like allergy considerations being what they are these days. But for the longest time, there was exactly one place only in all of Edmonton that she would ever consider eating fish and chips at. There was a little place downtown run by a couple of homesick Nova Scotians. We haven't been there in a while. I don't know if it still is a thing. But if it is, I can slip you the name.
Sounds good.
It's the only place that she would bother eating fish and chips at.
Yeah, no.
But yeah, a couple of homesick Nova Scotians. I think they came here for the oil patch. Decided that wasn't for them. Decided they weren't moving back. But I guess they have like agreements with, fishermen out in Nova Scotia. So they get obviously not, as fresh as right off the docks, but as close as you can get to that here. Is what is there. So I think it was called like Back Home or something like that.
Neat.
Anyways, it was enjoyable to go when we because we used to live kind of in the area, and so it was always enjoyable to go there. But yeah, trivially easy to just find delicious fish and chips, or fish cakes actually became my favorite thing, I think. Like if I didn't know what else to get on the menu, I would get the fish cakes, and I was like never disappointed.
Awesome.
So, and the craft beverage scene is also pretty amazing out in St. John, it has to be said.
Oh.
But this being a scouting podcast, yeah. So this being a scouting podcast, we shan't linger on that too much. But
no.
If you ever find yourself out there,
get a beverage though.
Oh yes, if you ever find yourself out there, it is literally you can like not have the same selection twice, and you will still not be disappointed.
Good stuff.
So yeah, no, I mean, and overall it was like just. So the Atlantic bubble is kind of weird, right? Because like on the one hand, to get into it, obviously there's these arduous entrance requirements, although nowadays most of the bubble has popped, just kind of in the span of time that I was there, a lot of the restrictions got relaxed. But like there's this arduous entrance requirement at the time, right? Like, to get there, you have to isolate for 14 days or 10 with a negative test or whatever the case may be, right? But you have to do this like mandatory isolation. You're stuck in a hotel room. And then when you finally get out and about in public, and I think I said some of this, right? Like it was as close to normal I felt in a long, long time. Mm-hmm. The first restaurant I went to, the first night I was free, there was an Irish band just playing, sitting around a table playing in the corner.
Neat.
I haven't experienced that in forever.
Right? Like the live music in a bar kind of thing.
That's been a long time. Or, yeah. And then, like, come Sunday, I was almost in tears because, I went to Mass at the church nearest my hotel, and we could sing. Like, we were, there was, music, like, my parish here has been doing music at Mass on and off, but the only person who can sing is the cantor, right?
Yes. Yep.
But actually, like, walking into the church, and there still weren't, like, songbooks in the pews, but the minute that the cantor struck up singing, like everyone else started singing along, and it was, I suddenly realized I hadn't done that in 16 months, and it's like, whoa, so that's cool. That was cool. And just, the people there, very, very nice. The people I was working with, really, really top tier. And, I got the work done ahead of time, so can't complain. Came up. I did manage to hook up with the Silver Falls Scout group for one of their meetings. Did my usual thing. Haven't done that in a while either. Did my usual thing, though, of reaching out to the local Scout group via Facebook and being just like, hey, I'm visiting. Do you want to visit tour? And they said, sure. And so I showed up, and the topic of the meeting was bike safety, or not so much bike safety, but like bike maintenance. So they were walking the scouts through like how to take a tire off a bike and patch the tube, and but it was just fun to show up and hang out with the scouts, and that was good. So yeah, so a good trip overall.
Well, that's awesome. I'm happy that it worked out for you, Ken.
Yeah, well, it's also the longest engagement I've ever had away from home. And, I am now in talks with Nutrien. So, worked out might not be the right phrase. I don't know. But, there was a lot of good in the trip. So.
Yes. Well, that's all right. I'm
How are you doing?
Slowly relaxing I'm cautiously optimistic at the moment, right? Like they've said we can go, we can be wide open and all that kind of stuff, but I'm still using a measure of caution myself. And that's
sure.
I think that's just me being a cautious person. I always like to really think things through before I commit to something. So
for sure. And obviously, different considerations as regards like health, risk factors, things like that, different comfort levels. And actually, like I have to say, one thing I did notice coming back to St. Albert was the signage at the parks. Like we've had signage at the parks for months and months and months now, and it's been the usual stuff. You know, if you're sick, stay home. Blah blah blah. Mm-hmm. These playgrounds are not regularly cleaned. You know, use at your own risk. Blah 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 blah. COVID bylaws, all that stuff. They've changed them though. So now the gist of the signage is that everything is back to normal, but one, like the first or maybe second line item is kind of exactly what you're talking about. You know, it basically just urges respect for the differing risk appetites of people, right? The first rule of, using the playground now is, respect that other people may have different comfort levels or standards. Can't remember the exact wording. I don't have a photo in front of me. But, just respect that other people may have different comfort levels, let's say, as regards things like the use of masks or social distancing or all of that stuff. And, I mean, that's really it in a nutshell, right? Like, yeah, we're reopened. And actually, I was talking with Northern Lights Council today because I was curious as to like whether this reopening meant that I could maybe look at possibly doing a museum sleepover this fall. And I got an answer back in the affirmative, right?
Right.
But, a lot of it is just coming down to like, yeah, the province is reopened. Individual stores, facilities, whatever else can still require things of their customers if they choose to.
Yeah. It's the no shoes, no shirt, no service kind of.
Exactly. Right. And yeah. And that's a good point, is that the idea that a particular store can require a particular standard for customers to enter is not, strictly speaking, a new thing. No shirt, no shoes, no service is a thing that's been a thing for a long, long time. There's like country songs about it. And so, yeah, I mean, if businesses want to say, no mask, no entry, that like they're within their rights to do so. And yeah, sure, you roll with that. And I mean, in a way, it, cuts both ways, I suppose. If people are wearing masks, well, don't get on their case about that. If
you're not wearing a mask,
choose not to, don't get on their case about that.
Yeah, I'm not going to rag on somebody for not wearing a mask.
Yeah, and just, as long as there's that understanding, like, hey, okay, this is where our respective comfort levels are at, and cool, we'll find a way to make stuff work. I do look forward to the possibility of, sometime within this calendar year of actually like being in the same room with you to do one of these.
Yes, I look forward to that time too, and I think it's sooner than I'm pretty sure it's going to be sooner than later.
Yeah, and I mean, the mic cords are fairly long, so
yeah,
we can space out as needed. But I do look forward to that, and that's another thing that actually I wound up talking about this today on another Discord server, but handshakes. There were a couple of people on the at the client sites in New Brunswick who opted for the handshake. And damn, that was nice.
Yeah.
Maybe I should. Maybe that was the wrong word to use. I don't know. Sorry if that offends your ears, listeners. But just like that's my heartfelt assessment of it. Is that it was just nice. Like it kind of I'm not the most social person, but just it kind of reminds you that wow, human contact, like that's a thing.
It's the same thing with giving somebody a hug too, right? Like
same idea.
If you're used to that kind of personal contact with people, I mean, yeah, I in my line of work, I was always shaking people's hands. You'd meet someone, you'd shake their hand, nice to meet you, just a general greeting. And
like it's just a thing.
Up until just recently, it was that I shook somebody's hand today. Actually, that was
nice.
Now, granted, I hand sanitized my my hands shortly thereafter. I didn't
sure
run around and touch a bunch of things and rub my eyes and that kind of stuff.
Sure.
I hand
and I mean,
sanitize.
that's fair. Yeah, that's fair. But yeah, it's sort of, it was this interesting, reminder that there's just, you can throw up the Vulcan salute or the peace sign or the namaste and it'll work for a while.
Fist bump, whatever,
Yeah, but it's not, well, fist bump's a little better, right? Like fist bump, at least, there is actually a little bit of contact there, right? But going for the purely contactless greetings that have been out there, right? Whatever they might be. It's just not quite the same, it's not quite a substitute for, and again, that's, a lot of that's just biology, right? There's this whole chemistry that surrounds the act of, actually making contact with a person. And we probably don't process most of it consciously, but subconsciously, there's a meaning and poignancy to it that you just don't get with a air high five or something to that effect, right?
Well, yeah, I get you.
So, yeah, but
I look forward to the day that I can see you in person and shake your hand.
For sure. And I got to admit, I am missing it more in a scouting context than in a business context.
Very much so.
So, anyway, to topic. And I got to admit, I hemmed and hawed on this a little bit, but unless you have anything better to go on, it occurs to me that, we spent an episode a while ago, I want to say it was sometime in the 70s, talking about knives. And I think we probably
episode 70, not sometime in the 70s.
No, we haven't been podcasting since the days of disco. So, yes, I do in fact mean it's sometime in the episode 70 odd range. But it's funny to refer to it as, back in the 70s.
Yeah.
The 60s and the 50s. Man, a lot of episodes. But I know we talked about knives, but I think we talked about them more in the context of knife as tool and I don't know how much we delved into the actual knife safety aspect. And so, because there was kind of I was privy to a discussion somewhat recently of, I got to admit, this is kind of cool, where, my daughter has her peer group in grade 7, or I guess, she's going into grade 8 now, but, she has her peer group from grade 7, and interesting admixture of kids, but she's really, really free to just, be herself with them, and, kind of taken after me. Scouting is a big part of her identity right now, which is awesome. And so, she's mentioned to her friends 2 or 3 times, and again, this came up recently too, just kind of towards the end of the school year, that, being in scouting, she has her knife permit. And of course, her friends are kind of baffled by this idea. And I think probably because they're maybe more thinking of it in terms of a firearms permit, right?
Right.
A firearms license, which is not quite what the knife permit is within scouting. Obviously, for the one, it's issued within your scout troop, so it's not it's a, unfettered license to just carry your knife with you absolutely everywhere. Not that, most firearms permits are that either. But it's, it's something from your scout group. It's not like a government license or anything like that. But two, just, the fact that there's a certain level of interest there within her peer group about, how the fact that by participation in scouting, she's trained, she does receive some training in the use of the proper use of this incredibly versatile tool called the knife. And so I thought maybe that we could just kind of, for a little while, dissect the training that goes into a knife permit.
I'm just reminded of a story that involved teaching knife safety and then having to do first aid shortly thereafter.
Well, that's that is a hoary old joke.
That was the person who was demonstrating needed first aid, not the.
Well, yeah. I mean, there is a joke there, definitely, and I know that's something that we occasionally crack wise about. Just and like the current Scouter mix in the 59th. And I mean, it is true though, right? Like, but that kind of gets to the point of it, right? Is that the knife is a very important tool, as we've previously discussed. But obviously, being a knife, there is a certain care that needs to be taken with how it is used. So, just to, and I mean, in fact, like, like within, so just to kind of quickly iterate through the regulations that Scouts Canada imposes on the use of knives, beavers, more or less, were not allowed to do anything with knives.
Mm-hmm.
Cubs aren't allowed to bring their own knives to events or to meetings. And like, this is an interesting discussion that I've had with a few of the families of youth who come through scouting, right? There's been a handful of Cubs we've had whose families have personally decided that their child is responsible enough to have a pocket knife. And obviously, if that is a parent's decision, I respect that as much as possible, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, parents, generally speaking, know their kids best. And if they feel that their kid can be trusted with a pocket knife or a Mora knife or whatever else, well, like, sure, right? I'm not going to get on the Cubs case and be just like, no, you absolutely shouldn't be doing that. But equally, I do have to, as the Scouter, step in and say, I'm very, very proud of you that your parents trust you in this way and that you can be responsible in this way. But I do have to ask you not to bring that to Cub meetings or Cub camps, right? If you're camping with your family, if you're out going for a hike on your own, by all means, throw it in your backpack, have a good time. But, you have to leave it at home for Cubs. And fortunately, the various youth who've been in that situation have been understanding. But then, of course, in Scouts, we actually do have the knife. But, sorry, I should finish up that Cub thought, because within Cubs, there's a common myth, and I think we talked about this too. There's a common, or maybe that was me and Reagan. Either way, there is a common myth that, Cub Scouts can't use knives. And that's not true either. They can't bring their own knife to a meeting or to an event. But we, as the Scouters, can have knife work themed events with the Cubs or meetings with the Cubs. But we have to be the ones who provide the knives. And of course, it has to be very supervised and all of that. There's a lot of safety that goes into it, risk assessment and all the rest. But you can have your Cubs use knives, but it's under more tightly controlled circumstances. Scouts is really where the option for a Scout to bring their own personal knife to an event or to a meeting emerges. But to get there, the Scout has to first earn their knife permit. And in particular, like, there's a few things to the knife permit, but the key component of it, or the most important component of it, is the safe use of knives. Now, of course, there are some standards that Scouts Canada imposes as regards like maximum length of a knife blade, and and I mean, like, you may recall that we did an episode on that. Actually, this was probably the What's in a Knife episode. And then we had to like immediately correct ourselves on some of the points because or maybe this was a different episode. There was one episode we did where we were talking about like the changes to like, especially the knife standards within the bylaws, policies, and procedures of Scouts Canada. And then by the time the episode went live, the BP&P had changed, and we had to go back and correct things.
Yeah, that's right.
So I'm not going to bother quoting like exact figures here, but like there are Scouts Canada bylaws and policies regarding especially the blade length. I think they relaxed any of the restrictions about folding and locking versus fixed blade, but certainly the blade length there's still a restriction there. So there's most of the training that you can find, if you search for it, will begin with like a discussion of different kinds of knives that can be used in scouting. And it's not really, I don't think that's as material to the discussion. The exact kind of knife that you'll wind up using it is a bit personal, right? Like when Ella earned her knife permit, I gave her 2 knives. She's got my old Schrade knife, the old timer, and then also one of my Mora knives. And I think in general she prefers the Schrade, the folding and locking, versus the Mora fixed blade. And I mean, I was kind of on the Moras for the longest time as well. I still generally tend to prefer them, although I did just treat myself to an Outdoor Edge folding and locking, which is really quite cool. But anyways, the exact kind of knife you're going to use, that can become a very personal thing for an individual. So it's not really material to get into the types of knives or like, whether there's a sheath or not. Like I know my Schrade had a sheath. I don't think I used it all that often. The Outdoor Edge that I just bought doesn't have a sheath. It just has a nice belt clip. Whereas, of course, the Moras have a hard plastic sheath, which is quite good because they clip into it. And I do maintain that, if you're at a loss what to get a scout who's just earned his or her knife permit and you want to get them a knife for a gift, and I've had a few families reach out to me, with exactly that question, just within the 59th. And my usual suggestion is a Mora knife, because even if it's not the knife that you end with, it's a really good starter knife.
What, you don't recommend a box cutter?
That's not. Yeah. I mean, I find great use in box cutters, but that's a different thing altogether.
Right tool, right job.
Right. I don't know if I would use a box cutter. Like, I mean, I would use a box cutter for cutting boxes. I have fond memories of, my first ever summer job working at a book bindery using a box cutter to slice the covers off of textbooks that had been sent in for repair. Because, that's a wonderful thing when you're like fresh out of grade 9 and you're looking to shake off the school year, slicing the covers off of grade 9 textbooks and getting paid to do it. That's just the best. Although other parts of working at a book bindery are manifestly not the best, but that part was. Anyways, digression. Squirrel. Right tool for the right job. Generally speaking, though, something like a Mora is probably going to be better suited to applications within a scouting context where a knife would be appropriate. I don't think you can make a feather stick. Well, you might be able to do a feather stick with a box cutter, but I'm not sure I'd want to try it.
Blades realistically, the blade on those box cutters are extremely thin and can break and jam in the wood that you're working with, and your hand can slip and
well, they're designed to break. Like that's kind of the point of a box cutter blade is designed to break. When one becomes dull, you just snap it off. When one section's too dull, you snap it off and go to the next one.
Right. And that can be problematic, right?
Yes. In a context
where stick and the blade breaks off and jams in the wood that you're using, and you could be doing some serious damage to your hand is all I'm trying to say.
Yep. So I mean, that is definitely a part of knife safety is, the right tool for the job. I mean, generally speaking, a box cutter is not what you're going to need in scouting. Something like a Mora or, a buck knife or something like there's a few different kinds that are more suitable, and you can find them in different outdoor sporting goods stores. Even Canadian Tire has a half decent selection of knives, actually.
Yeah. Oh, and part of knife safety too, though, is a sharp knife is a good knife.
Yes. And I was wondering where I was going to insert that in. I mean, I know I've got a document pulled up. I'll make sure it's included in the show notes, courtesy of the Second Russell Scouting. Although I don't think they're the ones who prepared it. I've seen this from a few different sites, but I'll link to the Second Russell at any rate. Yes, sharpness matters. It matters so much. For a few different reasons, right? Like, I mean, a knife that is not sharp will still cut things, but the amount of effort that you have to put into it is greater.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, the more force you're putting into the knife, the more force you're putting into the thing you're cutting, the more there is a risk of it skipping or, like deflecting off of something. And if it does that, I mean, obviously it can deflect at a funny angle. So even if you think that your hand or some other part of your body is out of the way, it may in fact not be. Yeah, no, a dull knife is quite dangerous, definitely.
At least from personal experience, when you're doing fine work with a knife and you have a dull knife, that's when accidents happen. When you have a sharp knife, you can really control the blade, the depth that you're cutting in, all that kind of stuff.
Well, because the knife is actually doing work when the blade is sharp, right?
Yeah.
When the blade is not sharp, the knife is, I mean, it's still wedge shaped, but
yeah.
The work is, you, the wielder of the knife, are basically the one doing all the work. When the knife is nice and sharp, the sharpness of the knife itself lessens the amount of work you have to do. It's so much easier to push a good sharp knife through wood or whatever else you need to cut versus a dull knife. And again, the problem with the fact that you have to use more force with a dull knife is that sometimes pushing a knife through, whether it's a stick or a piece of food or just anything, is that sometimes you encounter a region. Well, there's lots of ways this can go wrong. But like, for example, you can encounter a region within the material that you're trying to cut through that's just a little more resistant than the material around it. And all of a sudden that can, cause your knife to deflect or cause you to put even more force in. But then, of course, when you get through it, you're still putting all that force in. So all of a sudden now you lurch forward. There's just lots of ways that it can go very, very wrong for you versus the knife being sharp. You don't have to apply nearly as much force. And so if you do encounter irregularities in like the density of the material that you're working with, and you push through them, there's less of a risk that the knife is just suddenly going to like spring free and carry forward with your arm pushing hard behind it.
Mm-hmm. Did you ever use your Mora knife for like, and we may have touched on that in the knife episode too, but like from a handle perspective, using it to split wood essentially?
I've never done that personally. I've seen it done. I've never been the one doing it personally.
Where the handle is kind of strong enough and designed to take a beating, so to speak.
Yes, and some knives are, some are not. So, again, be careful.
And I mean, that goes with the knife safety side of things too, right? Like if you know that like a Mora knife, the design and the specifications are such that it can withstand that kind of punishment. You don't want to do that to like a Swiss Army knife, for example.
Goodness, no. Actually, just about anything with a hinge is probably not a good idea to do that with.
You want to open a bottle of Chardonnay.
Not at a scouting event, my friend. Not at a scouting event.
Well, hey, European scouts can they not have a glass of wine or whatever?
I don't know. I mean, you and I were both there at the WJ offer of service / adult volunteer area.
Yeah, I would say if there's no duty of care, one might say that a glass of Chardonnay with a meal wouldn't be such a bad thing.
For sure. But at least within Canada, none of that on scouting properties.
Yes. Yes.
Still, a digression. Squirrel. But yeah, you wouldn't ever use like a Swiss Army. Ideally, you wouldn't use a Swiss Army knife as, basically a improvisational axe. I mean, ideally, you have at least a small hatchet with you, but maybe you don't. There's a separate permit for that. Hatchet permit, axe and saw, I think, is the permit class that we have for larger implements of cutting, shall we say. Anyways, coming back to, the knife permit, again, like knife sheaths, ideally, a knife should have a sheath. It doesn't have to have a sheath, but there should be some place to store it so you can put it somewhere safe when it's not in use. Obviously, a fixed blade, you definitely want a sheath. That's why Moras are very nice. If it's a folding blade, a pocket will do. A zipper pocket is better, just to make sure that you're reasonably certain that the knife is contained within a particular area.
Mm-hmm.
If you do wear a sheath, one thing that we do stress within Scouts Canada for the knife safety aspect is that the sheath sit vertically on the belt and not horizontally.
Well, the big one for me, like the pro for sheath and whatnot, is to keep the the debris and junk from getting worked into that hinge point.
It is true, yes.
Or dulling the blade if you have but I mean, normally, like those folding ones that have sheaths that you put on your belt and that kind of stuff, they generally do a good job at keeping the debris from getting worked into the hinge. Whereas if you have it in your pocket or whatever, you still run the risk of collecting some
for sure,
random pocket lint and other things.
For sure, and that is definitely a problem I've noticed in my own knives. So yeah, for a folding blade, especially, a sheath is really quite invaluable. And again, like knives like the Mora, obviously come with a sheath of their own, and it's good to have a fixed blade knife in a sheath. That's pretty much a mandatory thing.
Mm-hmm.
And if you are wearing a sheath, put it vertically on your belt with the opening facing upwards. It's much easier to lose your knife if you don't do that. I think I don't know if it's necessarily the single most important principle of knife safety that we teach in Scouts Canada, but certainly the most memorable for its name is the blood zone. And the idea of this is that it's basically, and like when we actually show the Scouts how to measure the blood zone, ideally it's the length of your arm plus the length of the blade of your knife. But the idea behind the blood zone is that it's an area around you that is clear of obstacles and especially of other people. It's just, that, hey, I am using a knife for whatever purpose I'm using it for, stand back. You may even want to announce to your patrol that you are, in fact, opening your knife and that you're going to be using it for a particular thing. And then they will ideally know to stay clear. But the idea is that it should basically be a circle around you that's at least as long as your arm, that at least has the radius of, your arm length. And ideally a little bit more to allow for the fact that the blade is a few inches past the tip of your hand. That said, when you're marking out your blood zone, don't swing your blade around.
But how are you going to know?
You're just gonna have to. And you know what? Actually, that's not an unfair question for people like me who don't have a particularly great kinesthetic sense when it comes to especially their arms. And my daughter suffers from the same thing, unfortunately. I don't know if it was just that my growth spurts were oddly timed or whatever else when I was like a kid, but I don't have a particularly good sense of exactly where the end of my arm, like where the end of my fingers are, where my fingertips are, where the end of my arm is. Do
you run into door frames just out of curiosity? Like
sometimes.
Yeah, I was going to say, because I've had that happen too, where I'm taking a corner and I misjudge how broad my shoulders are, and I run firmly into the door jamb. It's like,
yep.
So,
yep, for sure.
I say, how are people going to know in jest? But some people don't really know how long their arms are, and maybe need to do a test. I had test swing sand without the knife. Just be like, okay,
if it's really a problem,
I need to work in, and then add really a few more. Add a flip.
Yeah. And if it's really a problem for you to visualize that, just pick up a stick or something
Yeah, exactly.
Use a proxy for your actual knife. But yeah, so the blood zone, you want to establish sort of a safe area around you where people aren't going to potentially get in the way of your knife. And then, of course, obviously, once you've established that safe area, once you're sure that there's nobody, too close to you, then it's safe to pull your knife out of its sheath or fold it open if you have a folding and locking one. Yeah, blood zone. Like I say, I'm not sure it's necessarily the single most important thing that we teach in knife safety training, but it's certainly the most memorable just for its name, blood zone. Anyways,
I was gonna say if you're measuring measuring out the blood zone, do you need to have the music from Psycho going?
That's although usually we'd frown on bringing along like electronic devices, including MP3 players, to camps. So
yeah.
So I mean, if you know the song, you can just kind of play it in your head, I guess. Kind of hum it to yourself, whatever. And then, of course, there is. Honestly, I think maybe if I were to pick any one particular thing, when it comes to knife safety, if I were to pick the most important thing, it would probably be like passing the knife.
Ah, yes.
And so the concept behind passing a knife is basically body first. Ideally, if you have a folding and locking blade, you just pass it with the blade closed, right? Like you close the knife, pass it to the other person. They can open it once they're clear of other people. But if you have a fixed blade knife or whatever the circumstances might be, maybe you do have to pass the knife while the blade is out. Or, again, with a fixed blade, you don't even have the option of retracting it. And so the most important part of passing a knife is this. Never pass the knife with the blade pointing at the other person.
Handle first.
Yes. Handle first, and ideally cutting edge facing down, or at least away from... the reason we say cutting edge down is because then it's generally speaking away from both your hand and the other person's hand. But yeah, ideally the cutting edge should be facing away from your hand and from the other person's hand as well. But yes, handle first, cutting edge facing away. If you have a folding blade, do consider folding the blade up before passing the knife. And, a certain degree of communication isn't the worst thing. Making sure, hey, okay, here's my knife. You got it? Yep, I got it. Okay, good. Obviously, the training recommends a little bit more direct verbiage, but obviously, as long as you're communicating with the other person that you're passing the knife to, that is probably sufficient. And then another important rule of using the knife is that, whatever you're doing, whether it's, if you're whittling or if you're cutting something like a piece of food, the direction that the blade is moving should never be towards a part of your body or someone else's body. So if you're whittling, don't whittle, like if you're whittling and you're holding a piece of wood in your hand, in one hand, and whittling with the other hand, the blade should be moving away from you. You shouldn't be whittling with the blade coming back towards yourself.
No.
Ideally, if you're cutting food, you shouldn't be holding the food in the hand. The food should be on some sort of clean preparation surface that you can just cut down into, right? I mean, I know most of us do this. Hold it like buns are the worst, right? Buns are the worst because you hold the bun in your hand and then you're just like cutting into the bun with the bread knife right towards your hand. And we all do it. And that's just like, you're really not supposed to do that. Because, obviously if you misjudge, it's
distracted, not paying attention.
Yep.
All those things, right?
It's trivially easy to end up cutting into your own hand, and that's bad. So yes, direction of the blade should always be away from you and away from other people, right? You don't want to be cutting into, you could be whittling away from yourself, and that's safe with respect to yourself. But if your buddy's literally sitting like right in front of you, well, A, you've failed to establish a proper blood zone, and B, if things go wrong, you're going to stab your buddy, and you don't want that either. I remember I remember helping out at a summer camp at the U of A campus, and there was a there were not enough adults in the room. There were not enough adults in the room. Let's just put it that way. And for the number of kids we had and for the activity we were doing, we really should have had closer to like 1 to 2 coverage, and we didn't have anywhere near that. And so the kids were trying to build some sort of structure out of cardboard, which meant cutting the cardboard with box cutters. And I was working with one kid trying to, help him with a particular piece of his structure. And the 2 other instructors that were with me were actually out of the room chatting. Man, there are days when I think back on this and I'm just like, I'm so glad we have like a hard 2 to 1 or like a hard minimum 2 rule.
Mm-hmm.
But anyways, this other kid across the room all of a sudden starts screaming because, of course, he's trying to cut this particular piece of cardboard and he's holding it in a completely unsafe way. And the box cutter skipped out of the cardboard and right into the side of his knee.
Cutter, you say?
Yes. Knees bleed, by the way.
Oh.
They bleed a lot.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, very important to always, always, always be cutting away from yourself and away from other people. Oh, I meant to say in the comment on the sharp knife, do you know what an easy way to test how sharp your knife is? Like if your knife is sufficiently sharp?
The method I'm familiar with is the kind of the weighted test on a piece of paper.
Yep, that one's good too.
Like you hold a piece of paper and then you just kind of let the knife, guided of course, but you let the knife fall, and if it cuts a piece of paper, it's generally pretty sharp.
Yeah, that is a good way to test it, definitely.
What's your way?
Well, so my way, having been using a knife for many, many years, is I'll actually, and you know what, I probably even shouldn't say this on the episode. I'm going to anyways for the scouters in the audience. Scouts, plug your ears. I'll run it along my thumbnail.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah, because like if the knife is enough to like bring up shavings of your thumbnail with just gentle pressure, it's sharp enough.
Yeah.
But I guess that kind of goes against the grain of cutting away from yourself.
I also know people that test the sharpness of their knife by like shaving their hair on their arm. Like, yeah, that's
no,
sharp
thank
enough.
you.
Don't do that.
No,
do not do that. That's silly.
Absolutely.
And lacks common sense. But
absolutely. All right. So I guess because I don't want to be recording until all hours of the night, could probably do a whole other episode on like knife care, right? Sharpening and all of that. But
or how to sharpen a knife, I guess.
Yes. And I mean, like there are a couple of different ways. I prefer the sharpening, like the multi-slot sharpening blocks that you can get at. They're actually like for kitchenware, but they work well for scout knives too. You can, so knife sharpener tools, quick and easy to sharpen a knife that way.
Yeah.
Oil and grit, or like on a stone or a sharpening rod.
If you're a purist, I think the sharpening stone is kind of your preferred choice.
I want to be a purist. I don't have time to be a purist.
Sometimes you just need a sharp knife.
Yeah. And not half an hour from now.
Yeah. If you want to have a Zen moment and sharpen your knife, maybe that's the time to bust out the stone. But
yeah. Anyways. But yeah, I mean, and there's all kinds of cool tools that you can get to sort of bolster the sharpening stone, right? Like I remember being out at, this was last year, kind of during the summer. We were out at the lake lot with some friends from our kids' school, and the husband was sharpening a knife, but he had the sharpening block and the oil, and he also had like this honing tool, and he was like measuring the honing angle. And I mean, if you want to go like all in on knife care and knife sharpening, that is the way to go. I just don't have the time. So anyways, different options for sharpening, but general knife safety rules, kind of the important stuff that I think is material to the episode that we've been putting together so far. The biggest thing is, obviously don't use a knife unless you're authorized to. So for scouts, that means that, if you don't have your knife permit and you do not have the permission and supervision of a scouter, absolutely don't use a knife. Cub Scouts, that goes for you too. You can't earn a knife permit, so don't use a knife at a Cub event without the permission and supervision of a scouter. Beyond that, the knife is honestly one of the most important tools that you will have in your collection as a scout.
Mm-hmm.
It is a very versatile thing. It's a very important survival tool. Please treat it with respect. Keep it sharp, keep it clean, keep it in good working order, and never leave it unattended. Generally speaking, a knife should only be used for outdoor skills use or whittling activities. Never throw your knife. Obviously, never threaten someone with your knife. And generally speaking, you shouldn't be using your knife inside a shelter, inside a tent. It's if you have downtime and you want to whittle, that is awesome. I definitely encourage whittling, but make sure you're doing that outside for a couple of reasons. One, you don't want to cut your tent. Two, you don't want wood shavings in your sleeping bag.
Yep.
See also crumbs. Clean your knife after you're done using it. Sheath it or otherwise store it when you're not using it. Much like scissors, don't run with it. And it's also not for playing games. And, again, pass the knife safely. Handle first, blade pointed away from you and the other person. We do also have some other traditions around knives in Scouts Canada. A lot of groups and a lot of events will, for example, have the tradition of, knives not being allowed to be brought to a formal campfire or Scouts Own. Sometimes a knife log is used. I know there's a lot of debate around knife logs. I know there's been some cases of people like having their knife stolen out of a knife log, which is just not cool. But then also putting your knife, stabbing it into a block of wood, that does actually detract from the sharpness of it a bit. So I know there's a lot of debate around knife logs. But I do like the tradition of not bringing a knife to a campfire or a Scout Zone. And so, I mean, if a knife log is not being used, or if you don't want to put your knife in a knife log, you can always just leave it back at your tent. Generally speaking, at least within Scouts, we do ask that if you have your knife permit, that you have it on you when you're using your knife. And of course, the knife permit is revocable, which is to say that, if you are using your knife in an unsafe manner or in a threatening manner, it can be taken away from you, and then any privileges you may have had to use your knife at a scouting event will be revoked. So those are kind of the high points of knife safety. The actual knife permitting process is a little more detailed than that, because of course you need to be able to demonstrate your knowledge about the anatomy of a knife, different components on most knives, identify items on a pocket knife, for example, that would need to be inspected prior to use, explain the blood zone, do a whittling demonstration, do a demonstration on knife use for other outdoor skills. The actual permitting process is fairly comprehensive. And we're not going to get into that in this episode, but I do think it is important to, just have a chat about knife safety, because a knife is a valuable tool. I love my knives. I have several. But they are seriously like one of the most versatile and useful parts of my kit. Even when I'm not doing a scouting activity, I usually have one along with me, just because, I don't know, I feel kind of naked without it, But they do have to be, used in a respectful and cautious and courteous manner, as befits a scout. Right. So because we're trending a little bit late here, I do have a couple of shout-outs. So the first one, and this was also in Scouting 5, but, I'll mention it here. This is from Dave Walker, who I believe is with 3rd Blueberry Scout Group here in Alberta. And so out a little bit west of Edmonton, there's a area called Chickacoo Lake. and there's a scout lease on Chickaku Lake called Scoutland. And evidently, the 3rd Blueberry are hosting an open house at Scoutland for scouters to come out and find out a little bit more about the camp and what it can offer. It's a neat little property, well worth checking out. We've done at least one camp there, and we've also used it for hikes in the past. If you happen to be in Alberta, and especially in Northern Lights Council, they'd be very interested in having you come out for the day. And the open house is being held on July 24th between 10 a.m. and 5 p.m. Dave also specifically extended an invite to us. So I will see if my July 24th is free, and I will see if I can maybe get out there and possibly record a few snippets or sound bites. I don't know. My January is pretty stacked already, especially because, of course, having just come back from a month away, my wife is definitely trying to make up for lost time with her shift schedule. But if I can make it out there, I definitely will.
All right.
So thank you. Say which? The 24th, yes.
Yeah, I'll have to keep that in mind, I guess.
10 a.m. to 5 p.m. So thank you, Dave, for the invite. I'll see if I can make it work. We'll see if we can make it work. And then the other shout out is to, well, you know what? And we've had them on before. So this one is to Scouter Tara from the 163rd Winnipeg Scouts, and also her 2 sons, Kieran and Keegan. It's been a little while. So you may recall, Colin, they're the ones who, remember when we did the Campfire Blankets episode? Mm-hmm. They were the ones who suggested that topic.
Oh.
So anyways, a couple years have rolled on since then. And they are now finishing up in Beaver Scouts. In fact, they are working on their North Star Awards right now, or well, they were until just recently working on their North Star Awards. And in particular, they chose to do their North Star project. They chose to do a fundraiser for a cat rescue service called Rescue Siamese and Stray Cats. That's a rescue service in Winnipeg. So what they wound up doing was a virtual community service project called No Cats Left Behind, sort of playing on our own in-house program. In exchange for a donation, either monetary or supplies, directly to Rescue Siamese, they would make drawings of people's pets. And the reason they chose Rescue Siamese is because their own pet cats came from that particular rescue service.
Oh, wow.
And evidently they were able to raise, so this is actually kind of cool, because at the time that Scouter Tara reached out to me, they had raised $900, which is pretty darn cool.
Mm-hmm.
And just within the span of time that Tara and I were exchanging emails, they actually managed to top $1,000. Another donor came out and enabled the boys to top up their fundraiser to a full $1,000, which evidently was their goal.
That's awesome.
Yeah, so that is the completion of their North Star project. Well done and well earned, I say. All right. So those are the 2 shoutouts I have: Dave Walker and then Tara and her 2 sons. So, how about you? Anything?
No, I'm good. No shoutouts as I can remember.
Alrighty. Well, then, of course, shout out also to Scouting Radio for rebroadcasting our episodes to their worldwide scouting audience. If you're listening to us on the Scouting Radio right now, hey, we are so happy for that. Be even better for you, and maybe for us too, if you were to head on over to your podcast app of choice and mash subscribe on our podcast, or, just reach out to us, get in touch. We would love to hear from you if you're chewing on the episodes week after week.
Scouter Ken.
Yes?
How does one get a hold of us?
Well, email is still an option. scoutingstuffpodcast@outlook.com or gmail.com. Twitter is an option as well, twitter.com/SSYSK podcast. You can reach us on Facebook or Instagram as well, facebook.com or instagram.com/scoutingstuffpodcast. Same handle at both of those sites. And of course, if you hit up the show notes, you'll find a link for the Discord server that we continue to use to record these episodes. Be happy to chat with you there. I'm constantly lurking Discord throughout the day. All the various servers that I'm part of. And lastly, of course, we would encourage you to leave us a review on iTunes or Podchaser, or I don't know if Spotify does reviews, but if you happen to notice that whatever podcast service you are using to listen to us allows you to leave reviews, please consider leaving us a review, because hey, we would love to hear what you think. Oh, and you can leave us a voice message at scoutingstuffpodcast.com. Just look for the little microphone icon. It usually hides in the lower right-hand corner of the screen. And that is that. So, well, thank you, Scouter Colin, for another fine chat. Lovely to catch up.
Yeah, same to you.
And thank you out there for listening. And until next time, be prepared.